Episode 77 of the Interpretation Station is called to order. Welcome, everybody. Dobrodošli svima. This is a special episode of the Interpretation Station for my Jedi-speaking followers. Yes, all you guys from Bosnia, Montenegro, Serbia, Croatia, who I all just lump you in together as being Jedi speakers. It's been a while since I've done an episode for you, so I thought, here I am on holiday in the region. Yeah, I'm here in central Serbia. So for those of you who don't know, my mum is Serbian, so she's from Belgrade. So I still have a lot of ties with the region, and so here I am, and I thought, okay, I've got to do an episode for you Jedi speakers. I must apologise for my state of attire at the moment. It's absolutely baking here. I'm sure all of you who are out here know what the temperatures have been like here. It's about, 36, 37, and it's really hot. And the Britisher in me, I'm half and half. I'm half British, half Serbian. The Britisher in me cannot take this heat or finds it very difficult. I think you can already see the sunburn developing. I'll start to go brown on my shoulders, red on my back. I find it hard to cope with the heat. And so anyway, to do this episode, I'm a bit more underdressed than I usually am. I don't usually go to work dressed like this, but needs must sometimes. Anyway, what have I got in store for you today? Well, I've decided I've got it's actually an interview I'm going to be doing today for you. An interview with the Croatian Prime Minister, Andrea Plenković. So it's going to be a bit different because usually I give you speeches, right? The last time around, I had a speech by Ivica Dačić, the Serbian parliamentary speaker. And I did it, so I'm going to sort of follow a similar format because I've actually recorded myself interpreting Plenković like I did with Dačić. So I'll be doing a sort of self-critique of my own interpretation. It's an interview that he gave to, I believe it's called Večernji TV. I think it's the same company, I guess, that owns Večernji List, the sort of newspaper. It's one of the big, for those of you who aren't from Croatia, it's one of the big Croatian newspapers. And the interview was from 24th of June 2020. So it was from over a year ago, actually. So the situation was a little bit different to what it is today. It covers a lot of themes. Obviously, it covers our old friend, good old COVID. This was in the height, well, as I say, this was last summer, so things were sort of at their height there. But it also touches on electoral themes also. There's like the upcoming elections in Croatia. So it was quite a long interview. It was about half an hour long. So I've just taken a sort of about 6-minute segment excerpt from it of me interpreting, and so I'll be looking to what I did well, where I could have improved, what bits I got wrong, why I got them wrong, how I could have got round them perhaps better. So it was a first attempt that I did it on. I should point that out. Not much preparation. No preparation, actually. So I just went straight into it. So, it'll be interesting to see, as I say, to analyze my own performance, and I'm sure we'll find some interesting new things, interesting new words and things. So also just to set the scene, as it were, a bit, it was just after, if you recall, last summer, there'd been a big tennis tournament held in the Balkans, in the ex-Yugoslavia, if you like. It was, if you recall, I think it was organized by Novak Djokovic, and that had triggered sort of an episode of COVID in the region. So it was just after that. So he speaks about that at the beginning. So if you want to go and see the whole interview, I'll give you the link and everything. So anyway, they then move on after the COVID. They move on to the electoral themes, and as I say, that is the part that we're going to be focusing on. Before we get started looking into my performance, please do remember to subscribe. I'm going to tell you that now from the beginning. If you like what you're seeing, if you find these videos helpful, please do subscribe. And yes, without much further ado, I'm sure you don't want to look at me any longer. Let's get down to the text and see how I did. Right. So I'm going to put the transcript up on the screen for you all to see so that you can follow along with it. And you'll see Ivkovic is the interviewer. Okay, so he's going to be the first to speak, talking about the electoral campaign.
Moving to the electoral campaign.
Izborne kampanje
The campaign is in full swing in recent days because of the deteriorating epidemiological situation. There was a question raised, should the elections be postponed? Okay, so a couple of things here. Upunomieku, so I think I said here it's in full swing. In English, you can say in full swing, something's in full cry. So you've got a couple of options there. One other thing, if you know you're going to be doing a meeting going into English and it's about COVID, I would practice saying the word epidemiological before you start. It's a real mouthful to actually say, and I couldn't get it. I was really struggling to get it out, and he uses it a couple of times. Epidemiological. It's actually much easier in Jedi to say. You say, what is it? Epidemiologica. Epidemiologica. Rolls off the tongue much more easily than epidemiological. So it's a minor detail, but you'll be. I mean, as I say, you can lose a couple of words just trying to get that word out. So always be just careful of apparently simple things like that. And okay, postavilo se pitanje. I said literally the question was raised. So about postponing or I guess you defer the elections. I think you're more like to say to postpone the elections. Some experts say it's possible, but in the event of state of emergency being declared, then that would be done by the Prime Minister at the proposal of the government. Okay, a couple of things here. Proglašenje izvanrednog stanja. So the important collocation here is to declare a state of emergency. You just want to, it's not announce or whatever. You want, that's the collocation, declare a state of emergency. And now in the next sentence, I made a mistake that, okay, to bi proglasio predsjednik Republike. And the mistake I made here was, I think this is going to be a mistake that people who are looking to add Jedi as a C are more likely to make than Jedi native speakers. And I'll tell you why. So it's a bit confusing in Jedi because you have what's called predsjednik vlade is the prime minister. You have predsjednik države, okay, that's the president. Predsjednik vlade is the prime minister. And so, okay, here he says predsjednik Republike. So here that is actually the president, okay? Same as predsjednik države. And I got confused because both times, I mean, the official title starts with predsjednik. And so I thought I'd heard predsjednik vlade. So I said prime minister. This would be declared by the prime minister. But no, this would be declared by the president at the request or at the proposal of the government. So, yeah, I think it's a trap that non-native Jedi speakers are more likely to follow. Now, I know most of you out watching are probably native Jedi speakers, but I know there's a few of you. I know there's a few people who are looking to add Croatian Cs. So just bear that in mind, you guys. If you are looking to add, I'd be interested to know how many of you out there are Croatian Cs. How many of you are looking to add Croatian, Serbian, Jedi as a C? It's always interesting for me to know. Okay, let's go on. Is that realistic? No. I don't know where people get those ideas from. We decided that it was best to hold elections in the summer for two reasons. Okay, so I mean, mi smo donijeli procjenu. So again, sometimes with a thing like that, you just need to make sure, don't overcomplicate. Just say, we decided, that's what they did, donijeli procjenu. We decided it was best to hold elections in summer. First, in consultations with our scientific council, so with epidemiologists, experts who know exactly what the trends are with such epidemics. Okay, so here our old friend comes up again, epidemiology. So again, it's much easier in Jedi. Epidemiologist. I think I managed to get it out a bit better than I did the first time. But yeah, I don't know what you could perhaps write it on a piece of paper and notes and just divide up epi/demi/olo/gists. That might actually help you pronounce it correctly. Just an idea. This could be a little. I mean, this is so. Sanashim. Actually, one thing, little mistake I made here. I think I heard znanstvenim savjetom and not zdravstvenim. So I should have said here, our health council. I I think this is yeah. I think I heard znanstveni, and I think obviously you have these differences in the should we say the Jedi dialects between Croatian and Serbian, and so in Croatian I believe you say for znanstveni. That's scientific. So I thought I heard znanstveni, and so I said scientific council, but it should obviously have been the health council. And then the rest of the sentence, koji detaljno temeljem svoje profesije znaju. I didn't really sort of go into too much detail with that. Who I said they are experts in their profession. Perhaps you could say something like who know their profession inside out would be a way of reflecting that detaljno temeljem svoje profesije. And for dinamika pandemia, you want to say, I think trend. I think that was the right choice of word there, as opposed to a dynamic. Pandemics, we decided that it was more likely that there would be a more serious second wave in autumn rather than during the summer months when diseases such as COVID are at their lowest intensity. And that's okay. Notice, I mean, COVID-19, I think he said, again, it's a classic example. I just tend to I just say COVID usually, and I think that's perfectly reasonable to do that. If you've got a fast speaker, if they say the COVID-19 pandemic, I mean, you don't need all that detail, just say COVID. And for najnižeg intenziteta, so I talk about at its lowest intensity, so I pretty much copied the words used by Plenković. You could say another thing you can say in English is at its lowest ebb. When things are ebbing, they're at the it's to do with often with tides, the ebb and flow of the tides. So ebb is when things are reaching their sort of lowest level. So that's a good, very good alternative, very high register alternative to describe something low, the lowest ebb. Why? Since we had elections last back in 2016, so it would be 4 years, a decision to go now, following the Croatian presidency of the EU, to reiterate, to renew the legitimacy before the Croatian electorate. The whole point is to have a stable government, a parliamentary majority starting in the autumn to get to grips with economic recovery and also with public health security. That's now one bit he throws in here that's not in the transcript. He talks about when the last Croatian elections were, and he says that they were in the Rujan Meseca in 2016. Now I'm going to admit to you right here. So I really do not know the Croatian months. I have to say, I think I might have told you this before, but in 2014, I did it with the European Parliament. So I went to work in Brussels for 1 month using Croatian. And so one of the things I had to learn when I went was to learn these months, because you've got to basically learn them just individually. They're very hard to, you can't really, there's no relation to like the January, February, March sort of months. They're all those months are completely different kettle of fish, if you like. So yeah, he says that the last elections were in the Rujan Mesec. And so my tactic there was just to skip. I just said they were back in 2016. He's talking about an event that was 4 years ago, and so I took the decision that you can just basically drop the month. I mean, you can do this as a tactic you can apply generally. Sometimes maybe you just miss the month. They give you a date and you just miss it, even if you would understand the month anyway. So sometimes these things get away from you, and you have to take a decision in the moment, say just to drop it. So I now learn. I have done a quick search. So Rujan is September. So I had to learn all those. I'm just looking at them now. Siječanj, veljača, ožujak, travanj, svibanj, lipanj, srpanj, kolovoz, rujan, listopad, studeni, prosinac. So you guys who are looking to add a Croatian C, you need to learn those months. Believe me, I learned them. I think I did learn them back in 2014. I had them for that month, and then when I came back to the UN, and I just forgot them all afterwards. And then there's a couple of other interesting things in that little section. Okay, stabilnu vlast, stabilnu vladu, and I think I just said stable government. The English trying to convey the idea of stabilna vlast. You know, you sort of your sort of stock words for vlast would be like power or authority, but you just wouldn't say that in English, to be honest. You know, the idea was to have a stable power or stable authorities. Now you would just say stable government. Maybe you just say stability. You could maybe say the idea was to have stability, stable government, a parliamentary majority, so that we can ulovimo koštac sa ekonomskim oporavkom. So get to grips with the economic recovery. So that's very much a literal translation, I think, of uloviti u koštac. To get to grips with. The whole idea. So there was no talk of the president or me about any postponement. That was something that was kicked about in the media, but in nobody, not in the government or in the party, that was never discussed. Okay, a couple of interesting ideas for you here. So I said, to je nekakva teza koja se plasira u medija. I said this was just something that was kicked around in the media. Perhaps a slightly higher register than kicked about was just something that was mooted. This in the media, to moot something is that sort of kick it around, you know, to put an idea into the public, to moot it. So it was mooted. You know, the idea is there were rumors. Okay, so that's a good word to know. A good word. It's a verb you know, these changes were mooted. There was talk of them. Ona ne stoji, but maybe you could say here, it doesn't cut any ice. It doesn't hold any water. I think I actually just skipped that and just said that there was no discussion of this either in the party or in the government. Yes, the president said he'd never discussed that. That's not an option. I don't even know who might launch such an initiative. I think that came on the basis of some pseudo information with some discussions with officials. But okay, ja ne znam ko bi takvu inicijativu mogu pokrenuti. I mean, I said here, I don't know who would launch such an initiative. I think perhaps in English it might be more natural to say, I can't think who was behind such an initiative. We would probably just, rather than just going with a verb for pokrenuti, I think the idea is who'd be behind such an initiative. And then, so, poluinformacja, I think I said a half-truth. Or pseudo information, I think I said, didn't I? It was based on some kind of pseudo information. Another way you could perhaps do poluinformacja razgovor. It was based on some chatter. Gives it the idea that it's not really official. And I say this official denied it, and the matter was clarified. And then that was denied, and that's not an official position either of the government or the party, so it's not an option. The elections will take place. End of story. To je sve, that's a good one for to je sve. Okay, end of story. Kraj priče. Okay, you'd say the same thing in Jedi as well.
The
campaign, their campaign is based on you and your rating. That makes sense. Another way of saying so što je logično, so I've said here that makes sense. You could say that figures. Okay. What's more, a distinction was drawn. Plenković or Bernardić. So you say that Bernardić is inexperienced, whereas you're a leader that has run into many problems that you've managed to deal with. So postavlja se jedna jasna distinkcija. So you want a good, the collocation with a distinction is to draw a distinction. Okay, a distinction is drawn between Plenković, either Plenković or Bernardić. Suočio se sa brojnim problemima. Okay, I've said run into many problems, faced many problems, encountered many problems. Believe that Bernardić, do you view him as incompetent, not competent to run a government? This word nekompetentni, you'll notice I actually correct myself. because he says initially he's incompetent to run a government. It's a bit strong in English. If someone's incompetent, they really are useless. So I changed it to not competent. Now looking back, and maybe a better way to put it would have been, do you think he's not fit to run a government? That's a very good word to have in English, fit or unfit, when talking about someone's competence, basically. It's good to remember. And you can also use it to refer to a system, whether is it fit for purpose? Is that system fit for purpose, that mechanism?
Its campaign is based on our manifesto. It's called Save Croatia, a program which for our citizens in future, I call it in the second half. That was the first half, the first mandate. Now we're looking forward hopefully to the second mandate, second half.
Okay, Sigurna Hrvatska, I think I said here, safe Croatia. Perhaps secure Croatia might be been better. I don't think there's a big difference here. I've gone for safe. I said manifesto. I said national strategy. For some reason, I said manifesto. Whenever I think about elections, for some reason, whenever I think of elections and parties or what they're going to run on, so usually in English we talk about manifestos. I mean, you could say a manifesto here, but I think strategy, just using the cognate, would have been fine as well.
Give clear messages: safe jobs, safe pay, safe retirement, safe borders.
Safe pay, safe wages perhaps would have been a little bit better. Sigurne mirovine, I said safe retirement. Perhaps again, maybe safe pensions would have been sounded slightly better, but I don't think it's a big deal.
And absorption of European values that we will be implementing in consultation with our European partners at an amount twice as what it was in the last 7 years. So
I can make a couple of small mistakes here. For some reason here, absorpciju europskih sredstva. So this is obviously European funds, and for some reason I heard values. I don't know why that came to mind. It's a bit of a strange phrase to me. Kvalitetna absorpcja europskih sredstva. I said, you want to say high quality absorption of European funds. Maybe he's talking about high quality utilization of European funds. Seems to me a slightly strange choice of word, this absorpcja, but I think you can probably just say that the absorption as I did, but to me it sounds a bit odd, but never mind. Na razini Europske unije, so this is a sort of, for the non-Croatian dialect speakers, na razina is a level, okay? So if you're speaking in the Serbian or the Montenegrin dialect or Bosnian dialect, I think you're more likely to hear na nivo. Okay, so if you're going to be talking about the European Union, obviously the dialect of Jedi that you're most likely to run into is probably going to be the Croatian dialect. So that's a very important word to know, na razini.
We're talking, according to the Commission proposal, about 22 billion euros that Croatia will help us in the recovery need. What you talk about, whether it's better for Croatia to be led by someone with my experience or someone without any experience in executive leadership like the SDP leader, it's up to the electorate to make that decision. There's no one.
Yeah, I don't know. In this statement, I'm going a lot for the electorate, the Croatian electorate. For some reason, the word voters wasn't coming to me. I don't know. Sometimes it happens, isn't it? And when you're working, you have a certain word that just won't come to you in the moment. But electorate is fine. But let's say Croatian voters it's up to the Croatian voters to decide who the better man is, shall we say? Also, iskustvo u izvršnoj vlasti. I think I said what? Experience in executive leadership. I think, again, in English, I think it's more natural just perhaps to say in government, maybe in executive government, but I just don't think we'd put it like that going into English. But what I said, I think, was fine.
third who's going to come into the equation. There's all this blackmail, these comments from Most.
Yeah, I say here, so niko treći neće doći u poziciju da postane premijer. So I'd tweak this slightly. I said no, there's no third party that's going to come into the equation. So that's what we say in English. You know, when in Jedi you say neće da doći u priču. I think we would say no one else is going to come into the equation. Ucenjivačke komentari, this blackmail. I think this was the first time I'd heard of these two. I guess Most is another party. Skoro is another politician. So I heard Most clearly enough. So Skoro I missed. Sometimes I took the reason I just left it out was I figured that, you know, if it was important, if Skoro, who I didn't know was a party or a person at that point, I figured, okay, if it was important enough, he's going to be mentioned again, and hopefully I'll get him then. And sure enough, he does get mentioned later on. So,
you know, they repeat the story of Most from 2015, 2016, 2016. I said back then very clearly, there's no chance of HDZ, which I'm sure will win these elections. There's no chance of any parties who will receive a smaller mandate than us. They're not going to decide who's going to be prime minister. That
nema teorijske chance. If you want to convey that teorijske in English, I think the best thing to say is there's no chance whatsoever. Okay, there's no theoretical, as you can see, say nema, there's no theoretical chance. But again, if you want to give it that extra emphasis in English, I think the best thing to say is there's no there's no chance whatsoever. Now, I say here, when he talks about Hrvatska demokratska zajednica, I say HDZ, which is obviously how you would say it in Croatia. I think perhaps the English. So I see that the English rendering of HDZ is the Croatian Democratic Union. Perhaps the best thing to call them is just HDZ. I think it's a decision you have to take in the moment. But then so again, a question perhaps for you, Croatian followers out there. Do you call it the CDU, for example? Would you call HDZ the CDU or HDZ? What is the sort of naming convention when referring to that party? Just out of interest, it'd be good for me to know.
Exercise already been bad.
I'm a bit. Ta vježba se jednom pokazala lošom, so I said for vježba exercise. I think, again, this is maybe a point where it'd be better just to step back from the original wording and say in English something like, we've been through that once before, something like that. That gets across that negative connotation. Sounds a bit weird saying this exercise in English. Again, I'm doing it off the cuff here. I was doing it first time, so it's inevitable you're going to make some of these sort of little mistakes.
We learned our lessons, and in 2016 we said clearly that our position had not changed nor would change. Therefore, whether it's Mr. Bernardić or myself as current PM, and I think after I'll win the elections and future PM2, it's up to the electorate.
Okay, so now you'll notice here that I've gone for Premier. I start using PM, the acronym for Prime Minister, and I think that's legitimate. I'm going to say Premier always, I think, sounds a bit strange in English to say Premier. So yeah, I've gone with the PM, and I think it works in the context pretty well.
The government. Bernardić, they also offer secure jobs, economic recovery. Can you imagine Bernardić at the head of a government? I will win, so he cannot beat PM. So you cannot. That would be ridiculous if I said I could.
Okay, so yeah, bilo bi smiješno, so ridiculous, I think, is the best thing to say in English. Laughable, I guess you can say.
Bernardić says if he wins, that in his powers he will rely, if in power he rely on experts, experienced people.
So here again, I get slightly distracted by this izvršna vlast, which I guess, you say in the Jedi, it's a natural enough they say in the Jedi, but again in English, I think in English we'd probably say if in government. I correct myself a little bit, and then I say in power, which actually is better. But there seems to be in the language, in the Jedi language, there seems to be this emphasis on the izvršna vlast. So again, when you're going into English, it doesn't sound quite as good, and so you want to adapt it a bit. I think the best thing to have said would have been, if he wins, if he gets into government, then he'll rely on this team of people.
Please explain to our readers and viewers how the PM functions. How many decisions do PM's decisions, how much does he rely on his team?
So here, it slightly threw me the koliko. I thought it was going to be a reference to a number. Koliko odluk. I guess if it was how many decisions, it would have been koliko odluka. So anyway, sometimes you do have to correct yourself. Actually, it's interesting then here Plenković talks about a gremio. Is there a gremio behind the scenes working with the PMs? Obviously, that's you Spanish speakers out there, that's from a Spanish word, gremio, which is like a bit like a union, like a professional association. I couldn't quite find the best rendering in English. Maybe I think it's just a team, really. Maybe a squad. Is there a squad behind the scenes? Is there a team?
No, it doesn't. No, that's Bernadić's position. I get it. For lack of experience, I know he's waiting for the last moment so as not to jeopardize his own position. I don't see any other reason why he'd be doing it. I know he wants to rely on a team. No, I think a team, the list, I think the HDZ list of the people that we've put there on the list as candidates, I think they're seasoned, accomplished, they've proven themselves in the executive. I think.
Okay, so there's a section here where he sort of goes off and he sort of meanders a bit, and I don't. It's not actually in that bit's actually edited from the transcript, so. I was waiting for him really to sort of get back to saying something tangible and sort of concrete, if you like. That you'll have noticed, as I say, that Plenković was sort of speaking a little bit there, talking about Bernadić's inability to sort of live up to his predecessor and so on. Just at that point, I was feeling a little bit tired, and I was just waiting really for him to come back with a sort of coherent full sentence. So I just about get away with it, maybe. And then he talks about the lists. A couple of interesting words here. Kandidati naši su zaista ugledni I priznati. So you want a couple of good words here. So I think I said seasoned and accomplished. I'm quite pleased with those. So a seasoned, they'll often talk at the UN, for example. He's a seasoned diplomat. In other words, he's seen it all, he's got a lot of experience, that means. And priznati, so a good word again that I used here is accomplished. So those are two good words, two sort of complementary words that you'll often hear, at least diplomats or politicians, when they're praising one of their counterparts, that they'll often use. And so, they've proven themselves, dokazali su se, both in the executive and legislative branches of government. Vlasti is, again, the vlasti.
Our team is better than the SDP team now. That about decisions being taken by some sort of shadowy experts. That's nothing. What the PM needs to do.
Yeah, the savjetnici u sjeni, so I say shadowy experts. Maybe in the bit better to say behind the scenes, perhaps. Shadowy experts in English has that slightly connotation that those experts are a bit dubious. That who exactly are they? So, perhaps it would have been better to say sort of behind the scenes.
Do is every day face problems and every day resolve those problems, however hard they may be, however demanding, unplanned, sudden. When it comes to crises, what I can say is that we have gained envious experience in handling crises of various kinds: public health, financial, economic, transitional.
Stekli smo zavidno iskustvo I think I said envious experience. I think in English maybe enviable sounds better. Enviable experience in tackling crises. All those themes, we've absorbed them, and I think we've resolved them for the best, in the best way for our people. And because we've ensured economic growth, so 3% without going into debt, rather than a bigger recovery which puts you into new debt and deficit. So it gets quite technical, this last little bit that we're going to look at here, using quite a few economic terms that's worth looking at. So this više vrijedi zdravi ekonomski rast od 3% I sa smanjenjem javnog duga nego neki veći koji vas baca u veći dug. So I mean, looking at it now, I'd say something like, it's better to have good economic growth of 3% and reducing the public debt than neki veći, so higher economic growth, koji vas baca u veći dug, that puts you into more debt. He talks about the deficit. So what else does he talk about at the end of this little? They had 7 billion of debt SDP in their mandate. HDZ has brought higher salaries by over 1,000 kuna, a minimum wage of bigger by almost €100, higher pensions, 9 to 15%, tax reforms, 9 billion less, administrative reforms, non-fiscal benefits. So we have, in all segments, we've really proven ourselves. Now, now moving from economic question. Now, I just wanted to dwell a little bit on this last little section here, because he uses a few rather technical terms that kind of threw me, I must admit. And I got some of the numbers wrong because I was racking my brains trying to think of what the proper technical terminology would be that we'd use in English for some of these things. Some of them are sort of fairly straightforward, others more complex. Okay, prosječna plata, you want to be saying, the average wage, average salary, minimalna plaća, minimum wage. And he talks about zapošljavanje. So in English, we're more likely to say about, talking about job creation, so the money that's been assigned to job creation. Then he goes on to talking about porez, talking about tax, rasterećenje poreza. So I think we would talk about reducing the tax burden. I think that's the best in English. And then what really threw me was he talks about towards the end, parafiskalna I neporezna davanje. So I had to look this up. I mean, I think when I was doing it, I heard it and I went for something pretty generic. I think I said some sort of tax exemptions, which kind of reflects the idea. It's people basically getting a tax break. So when I looked up on Wikipedia, it's a parafiscal tax. So parafiskalna ni porez and neporezna davanja, more or less the same thing. And it says that a parafiscal tax is a tax on a specific product or service by which a government levies money for a certain purpose. The money raised is usually paid to a body other than the national tax authority. Parafiscal charges are charges levied by public or private agencies on the production of marketing of agricultural products with a view to financing activities for the benefit of the sector as a whole. So now you know. Okay, well, that might come in handy somewhere down the line. So, but I thought it was useful, as I say, to touch on those rather technical financial expressions that he suddenly starts using. Okay, so we'll move on. We'll do one more question from the journalist and Plenković's answer before we finish. So let's see. We talked about Mr. Škoro before, and I noticed that on a number of occasions you called him a charlatan. That's a rather offensive for a... Can I ask you, is that too offensive for an individual who perhaps after the elections, after the results, you might be speaking to about possibly forming a government? Mr. Škoro, what does he say about me? That's the real question. Of course, come just in this little section here, we find out, in fact, he talks, this is all about Mr. Skoro, who before I mentioned, I'd never heard of, I didn't catch the name before. You know, there was a reference to Most and Skoro, which I just missed. So just to show you that sometimes it's better just, if you're not certain about something, to leave it out and wait a bit later down the line when a reference to a name like that might become clear. So here it does become clear. Now we know that the Skoro is a Mr. Skoro. So again, it's one of those judgments you have to make in the heat of the moment, and so I've sort of got a bit lucky here. I've been able to sort of redeem myself because now I know who Mr. Skoro is.
He says you can't be PM. Is that? Does that stand to reason? Who's he to tell me or HDZ who's going to be PM?
I quite like what I've done here. This bit where Plenković says koji je on faktor da će određivati meni I HDZ ko će biti premijer. So I'm pleased the way I sort of just stepped back from the original, and I've, you know, in English this is what we would say. Now, who are you to tell me to do this, or who are you to tell me? In this case, who's he to say who's going to be prime minister? So, as I say, sometimes you have to just step back from the language in the original.
He was a member of HDZ, right? He was the MP, yes. Did he find it hard in the Sabor and left? Yes.
Okay, so I've gone here, saborski zastupnik. So I said here, was he an MP? And I think that's pretty good for zastupnik. I mean, for a zastupnik, you could also say, like, was he a parliamentarian? Was he a deputy? There's a few different options you could go for. And also I say, was he, was he an MP in the Sabor? So I think Sabor is like a name that you can pretty much just use the calque in English, call it the Sabor. You know, for example, it's like with, in Russia, we call it the Duma. In English, we call it, the Russian parliament, the Duma. Or we call, like, the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, call the Ukrainian parliament, the Rada. So it's perfectly acceptable. I think you could do the same here with the Croatian parliament and call it the Sabor.
Was he general consul in Vienna, who was placed there by the HDZ government? Yeah.
Okay, I'll walk into a bit of a trap here. So Plenković asks, je li bio generalni konzul u Pečuhu? Now, this is particularly relevant to you English A's, let's say, Croatian C's. So you'll know that in pretty much all the dialects, I think, of Jedi, the word for the name for the city of Vienna, capital of Austria, they say Bec. Now, I believe that's taken from Hungarian, bizarrely enough, but it's Bec, pretty much, I think, used by, whether it be Croatian, Serbian, Bosnian, etc. So I thought here I'd heard Bec, I said, and I had heard generalni konsul, so I assumed, he was like some sort of ambassador in a different country, ambassador in Vienna. Now, you look at the transcript, and it's actually, the place is Pechuha, and apparently Pechuha it's in Hungary. It is abroad, it's not in Croatia, it's in Hungary, but in English we call it Pecs, spelled P-E-C-S. So you live and learn. I went for a bit of what I might call an educated guess, and I was wrong. What do you do? So anyway, Pecs apparently is the place in question here. But yeah, watch out for that, you Croatian C's, Bec. Vienna.
Yes. Did he bring people around him that were in HDZ and now what, they're bigger Croats than we are? What's the thrust of that policy?
I'm quite pleased with what I did here with this word sukus. So I said, what's the thrust of their policy? And so I looked it up. I mean, it's pretty much the essence, the substance, the thrust. So here's an example of when you can, you look at the context of what's being talked about, and sometimes that, even if you don't know the word, which I didn't, sukus, you can more or less, by the context, again, have a fairly good guess at what it might be. So I'm pretty pleased with myself there. Makes up a bit for Bec, Pecs, whatever.
How are they bigger Croats than me or you or Toma Medved or Slavko Nanušić or whoever it may be on our list? This argument that somehow that there's some homeland movement, some sort of continuity, HDZ, that they're better than us, that doesn't hold water.
Okay, so there are a couple of interesting expressions here. So, ta teza da su oni izvorni. So I said this argument. Now, a very sort of in vogue word in these days in English is the narrative. So maybe that would sound better. The whole narrative that they're somehow Izvorni HDZ. Now here I said continuity HDZ. Now why did that word spring to mind? Okay, so with the IRA, so you had the IRA in the UK, the Irish Republican Army, during all the troubles. And, you know, they reached the peace agreement in the 1990s, basically to, I don't know, stop terrorist attacks, whatever. Now, most of the IRA was in favor of the peace agreement, but there was one sort of segment, shall we say, one faction of the IRA that was against the peace agreement and who sort of continued their operations, and they were known as the continuity IRA. They sort of saw themselves as the original, the core, and who they didn't recognize the peace deal. And so that's why I just got the same. I sort of parallel there between this sort of these split, presumably in the factions of the old HDZ, of the sort of the core, well, the main bit of it, and this sort of smaller faction that considers itself to be the original HDZ. So that's why the word continuity HDZ just came to me in that moment. And this story doesn't cut any ice. This narrative doesn't cut any ice. Doesn't hold any water. The whole message is that it needs to be cleaned up and tell people there is no agenda in their program that's not already been carried out by HDZ before. This is when we're in 2020 now. Croatia now needs leaders who will capitalize on our current position, be it within the EU or within the financial market or institutions. Those are the people who bring added value, bringing Croatia back to themes that have already been resolved, reopening things. I don't think that's the way to move forward. That's the difference between us and them. Okay, so he adds, so again, this last bit's not in the transcript. There's a couple of things I just want to point out to you. Okay, koji neće govoriti floskule. So I skipped that in the original. The word just wasn't coming to me, what the mot juste was, and I've thought about it subsequently. Platitudes. So people who speak in platitudes basically means, yeah, they say things for the sake of it, but they don't intend to follow up their words with actions. So that's really the best solution here. And at the end there, he talks about, reopening issues. That's a good word to have in English, okay? To basically go back to things that were settled, that you thought were settled in the past, but now you've got certain people who want to reopen those issues. So that's just a good word to have again in English. And so that's about it. We're going to stop there. So it's an interesting text. Yeah, it's good to do one that sort of, this is much more off the cuff. It's much more spontaneous, than the statements that I usually do, which are sort of all generally prepared. Presumably Plenković here is speaking, as I say, spontaneously. I guess he doesn't know exactly what the interviewer is going to ask him. So it's a good sort of technique. It's good to. It's a bit more fun usually, actually, to interpret those kinds of speeches, because they don't speak as formulaically, shall we say, as they do in when delivering an official speech. So, I hope you learned some new things from that. I'm fairly pleased with my own performance. There were bits and pieces, perhaps, I think I could have done better on, but I think given that I was coming into the that whole interview, that it was cold, that it was from a year ago, I think my performance was pretty reasonable under the circumstances. All that is left to be said is that if you have enjoyed it, if you've learned some new things, please do press the like button. Smash the thumbs up button. You know what I'm going to do also? I'm going to, because the interview was about 30 minutes long, I do have the whole audio. So what I'm going to do is in the description box, I'm going to create a link and you'll be able to click on it and you'll be able to hear my full rendering of the whole interview together with a link to I'll leave the link to the original transcript. You can sort of compare, cross-reference what I've done, see if there's any other sort of new words that you might learn. Anything that's interested you, any things you've liked, or any things that you would question, please do put them in the comments. By the way, I do love getting some feedback from you guys in the comments. And keep watching it. Keep watching the shows, subscribing, sharing with your friends. Keep following me on the LinkedIn group. And that's about it for today. So someone's stolen my my gavel that I used for the intro. So I've had a look around. The only thing I can find that's appropriate to replace it is this thing. So I'm going to have to close the meeting with this great big sledgehammer. So anyway, guys, been a pleasure. Episode 77 of the Interpretation Station, therefore, is adjourned.